Jay, you're on mute if you're not sure if you're trying to talk.
Sorry, I was just getting things set up here. All right, so my name is Jay, and I go by the pronouns he, him. So today we're going to be talking about promoting healthy interpersonal relationships. So I'm going to just get started with my brief introduction here. So I'm the youth training coordinator here at Families Together New York State. I'm a person with lived experience in the mental health system. So I've been a YPA in the community, residential, and clinical settings. And I am a firsthand survivor and my own hero in lived experience with intimate partner violence and teen dating violence. I currently live on Long Island with my wife and my pet rabbit.
Hi, my name's Meghann Simpson, pronouns she, her. I work in Youth Power as the statewide youth engagement specialist. I'm a person with lived experience in the mental health and child welfare system. I'm also someone who has survived domestic violence, interpersonal violence, and intimate partner violence relationships, as well as human trafficking. And I am the co-founder and development director of Now She Speaks, which is a nonprofit, and we address human trafficking and domestic violence. We can move forward.
So if the participant, just one participant, or everybody, just feel free to put your name, pronouns, the role at the agency that you're at, and just tell us what is your favorite spot to decompress or relax in. You can put it in the chat, you can unmute, say it out loud. Um, yeah.
Okay, so I will go first. I'm so sorry. I was just finishing my lunch here, so that's the only reason why I had my camera off. But my name is Unique Nieves. I am the Workforce Development Program support, and my favorite spot to go and decompress would be by water. So I would say by water, a good scenery, and I would just go have like a mindful minute there.
I love that. I'm also a big nature person. I didn't answer this question before, but my favorite spot to decompress or relax is also in nature, but I really like woods, like really thick woods where you can't even see if there's a neighbor within any.
Nice. I agree. I love it.
Okay, Z in the chat, your favorite spot is yoga on your mat. I used to be really dedicated to yoga, so it's cool to see that. Um, Carrie Ann decompresses on the back deck watching the horses in the trees. I'm envious of that. It sounds relaxing.
I would say my favorite spot to decompress and relax is doing a hayride. This is the best season of the year, in my opinion. Get to do the pumpkin picking and all that. Very relaxing.
Alexandra, youth peer advocate for Together We Can. Your favorite spot is greenery area, so a park or a forest. Where is Together We Can? I've never heard of that agency.
We're part of the Queens Alliance for the
Okay.
Families and Youth Peer Support Services. So we're based in Jackson Heights.
Okay. Love that you're here with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, that seemed like everybody on the call today. So the today's agenda, what we're going to go over today, we're going to go through a brief youth power overview done by Meghann. We're going to go through some general terminology, different types of abuse, conversations with youth, like what kind of conversations we can have with youth to facilitate healthy interpersonal relationships. We're going to talk a little bit about how to share strategic sharing that will be helpful to the youth that we serve. Activities that we could do with the youth to promote healthy interpersonal relationship. We're going to get a little bit into what to do if a youth discloses violence. So there are some things that we have to do, as youth peer advocates, and there are some things that are best practices. We'll have a brief Q&A. And then we'll talk about upcoming events. I want to provide a quick, excuse me, content warning. We don't know what the lived experiences are of those that are in the call today. So in today's TA call, we're going to be discussing topics involving abuse and violence of several different types. You're always welcome to take a personal pause or leave the call if you need to. Take care of yourself as you need to. And we'll be available after the call for additional support if you need it.
All right, so Youth Power mission statement. Our mission is to ensure that all children and youth have the support they need in order to succeed. This is also reminiscent of the Families Together mission statement, except ours is just much shorter. Youth Power is the New York State network of young people creating safe spaces for those looking to organize advocacy, speak out from that peer perspective, and amplify their voices for change. You can go on to the next slide. So Youth Power does a lot of different things across the state as being statewide representatives. Even if I'm in Western New York region, I get to provide support and activities in other regions. So we have our monthly youth peer meetings, which are skill development. It's an opportunity for us to talk about challenges and successes, find solutions, and it's also an opportunity for us to network as a statewide community of peers. We host a variety of educational workshops, both in schools and agencies, as well as virtually. University of Youth Power is our yearly conference. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of different things we do. Similar to Workforce, we provide technical assistance. However, the focus of our technical assistance is a little different. We have 2 different councils and advisory boards, if that's something you're interested in. We also create and promote social media campaigns. Our social media is really popping, so I encourage you to check that out. And then we partner with young people to create change within communities. We really collaborate with peers across the state. So I actually have a project I'm developing, and it's focused on New York City youth. So you being in Queens, I would be able to have the opportunity to include you or support you in any New York City related opportunities. So we can go on to the next slide. So Youth Power membership, you're able to become a member of Youth Power, and then you have opportunities to have volunteer roles, to be the first to know about advocacy opportunities within the state. You're also able to help make decision-making and solutions as we talk about the challenges in the youth community, as well as building up the youth peer advocate like skills and roles in our community. We can go forward. All right, general terminology. So we have domestic violence. Domestic violence is often associated with mother and father. However, domestic violence only means that it's happening within the same household. So you can have, let's say, roommates who aren't related at all, and they're having an abusive relationship and they live within that same apartment. That's considered domestic violence, even though they're not romantically involved. So then we have intimate partner violence, and this means that the 2 individuals are either romantically or sexually involved. So if you are engaging with someone who lives in a different house, you're kind of dating, you might not be dating, but you're engaging in romantic or sexual ways, if there are aspects of the relationship that's abusive, then that will qualify as intimate partner violence. And then lastly, we have interpersonal violence, which is something that's often like overlooked and forgotten about because it's a relatively new term. Interpersonal violence is when an abusive relationship is occurring between 2 individuals who are not romantically or sexually involved. So I'm going to give a brief example from my lived experience. I was renting a house with my brother, and we were both adults. And there were characteristics of abusive behavior being demonstrated. So that was an interpersonal violent relationship. And then teen dating violence. Teen dating violence is intimate partner violence and interpersonal violence. And I say that it can be interpersonal violence because they might not necessarily be engaging in what we think as adults are romantic or sexual. But as teens, it might be romantic or sexual, or it might be platonic, but they're labeling themselves as a romantic relationship. And that comes when the teens are exploring what does it mean to be in a romantic relationship. So I am going to pass it over to Jay.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go over a few of the technical terms when we're talking about this type of abuse or violence. The first one is perpetrator. So that's an individual who committed the crime or who, perpetuated the violence or the abuse. And then the term victim, it's a technical term for the person who is on the receiving end of that abuse or violence. And it is really just a technical term. You'll see it in like if there's any legal reports, or reports that need to go to the state central registry, whatever, you'll see the term victim. But it's unless somebody uses that label for themselves and self-identifies as that, typically it's not what we use colloquially or like the layman's term. A lot of people will have different labels that they want to use for themselves to sort of self-empower and give themselves back the power. And so we have survivor. So that's a term that's used to describe someone who's able to continue on despite the negative experience or violence or abuse in this case. So there's also thriver. That's a term used to describe an individual who uses their experiences as a motivator to succeed despite the experiences to promote healing. So that's going a step further, not just I survived, not just I got through this, but also I've gotten through this and I've gotten through this. This is the thing I'm going to do afterwards. This is the thing I'm going to do to bring the power back to myself. And the term hero, it refers to somebody who refers to themselves as the hero of their own story. So they're reframing their trauma responses that might create a feeling of shame, and now framing it as being one's own hero. Those trauma responses saved me and made me my own hero. So for example, someone might think, if I froze and I didn't do anything to stop it, it's my fault. But they reframe it as you did what you could to save yourself in the moment. So that freeze response is now being seen as I saved myself. I did what I had to do to be my own hero. So I think we go to the next slide. All right. So what we have here is what Love is Respect website calls the relationship spectrum. So healthy relationships are being able to make decisions together, and it can openly discussing what you're dealing with, any kind of conflict that you're dealing with, you're able to openly discuss it, like relationship problems, sexual choices, etc. So you enjoy spending time together, but you can be happy in that time apart, spending time with friends, not always being with each other. Some of the characteristics that you're looking for are respect, good communication, trust, honesty, and equality or equity in the relationship. So it doesn't mean always being happy all the time together, but just being able to kind of, parse out that conflict without throwing insults or throwing physical violence into the mix or any kind of controlling behavior. Then we get into unhealthy. I think that there's this idea that it's either healthy or abusive, but there is this kind of middle ground, sort of like a spectrum, when we're going from healthy to abusive, that there's like that unhealthy window in the middle. So relationships that are unhealthy, they have broken or disjointed communication, where the mutual support that one has, that they have for each other that you'd see in a healthy relationship, it's inconsistent or it's not present at all. There is no mutual support. So the conflict might remain fully or partially unresolved for extended periods of time, sometimes for the entire relationship. There's feelings of resentment that might show up when the conflict remains unresolved, and that can affect the relationship dynamic as well. So some of the characteristics you're looking for when you're identifying an unhealthy relationship is the breaking down of communication. So breaks in communication, not good communication about the conflict, feeling pressure, seeing dishonesty between people, seeing struggles for control, not necessarily one person controlling the other, but just maybe that controlling behavior or controlling terminology, and inconsiderate behavior. Maybe somebody's jealous and they're trying to get back at that person, by pretending to flirt with somebody else, for as an example. And the final part of it is abusive. That's the other end of the spectrum. So those relationships have completely uneven power dynamics, where one individual uses a means of force or coercion to get what they want from the relationship without the other person's consent. Usually it occurs in a pattern where the abuser of the relationship has all of the power. So you'll see things like accusation, blame shifting, isolating the other person, pressure, similar to the unhealthy relationship dynamic, and manipulation. So it's important when we're thinking about these abusive relationships. I had mentioned force or coercion. We're going to go through different types of abuse, and keeping in mind that force or coercion doesn't have to be physical. There are different ways to force or coerce somebody to do something. So if we could go to the next slide, that would be the next part of this. You're on mute, Megan.
Thank you. What types of abuse are we familiar with? There's a variety of different types, and if you can't think of the specific category, I'd love to hear an example. When we're thinking of different types of abuse, let's consider behaviors. How does abusive actions feel? What are the experiences of someone perpetrating or being victimized by abuse? What might be an abusive dynamic, and what might be the values in an abusive relationship that aren't being respected? So we do have a smaller group, so feel welcome to come off mute and just share out loud. But if you're not comfortable with that, I would love it if you put your response in the chat. Any thoughts? There's no wrong answer to this. Okay, so Z put yelling, physical pressure, or strong push to do something. Absolutely. You got verbal there because you're yelling, you got physical there, and then pressure or strong push to do something. That is complicated. That can be different types of abuse there. So that's a really good example. Unique, I saw you come off mute. Did you have something to share? Okay, we can move forward if not. So at my nonprofit, Now She Speaks, we have done extensive research on what is considered abuse and what are the different types or categories of abuse that can be present in a relationship dynamic. Alexandra put controlling someone's finances. Yes, absolutely. That goes to financial abuse. So we have 15 different types here. I'm going to go through some of them, and then I'm going to give Jay the opportunity to share some as well. Jay, did you want to start us off with physical?
Yeah, so physical abuse is the use of physical force, or using physical sort of, oh, sorry, one moment. Something just popped up. Okay. So physical abuse is using physical force to get somebody to do something, or lashing out physically because they don't like somebody's behavior, or they don't approve of that other partner or that other person's behavior. That was that one. I'm sorry. Just give me 1 second. Can I pass it back to you real quick? I have something going on here.
Sure, absolutely. So then we have emotional abuse. Emotional abuse can manifest differently depending on the approach that someone might take. So when we're thinking of passive aggressive behaviors, that can be emotional abuse because you're demonstrating a behavior to try and manipulate someone else's emotions. So we had in the chat pressure and strong push to do something. That can be emotional abuse. To really try to influence someone to emotionally want to do something they don't really want to do. Then we have verbal. This is yelling, it's critical comments, it's insults, it's getting into a really intense verbal altercation, and it can be, yelling. It can also be just back and forth aggressive tones where they're putting each other down. So then we have psychological. Psychological is also known as mental abuse. And psychological abuse is different from emotional abuse because when we have emotional abuse, we're targeting someone's emotions. That's what we're trying to influence and change or damage. When we have psychological abuse, we're focused on what is the thinking pattern of that person. How is the perpetrator altering someone's thought process in regards to themselves or their behaviors with other individuals? We have sexual next. I'm going to pass it back to Jay.
And so sexual abuse would use coercion or using physical force to complete sexual acts with somebody or to make somebody do sexual acts on themselves. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm on the seat. Okay. And then financial abuse would be holding finances over somebody's head, maybe, having control of all of the finances, making somebody, give their finances to the abuser. The perpetrator or abuser says, I need these finances. I'm going to take your money and I'm going to control the money. I'll give it to you when I want to give it to you. Or maybe using a lot of gifts or giving a lot of money to coerce somebody to do something. Those are a few examples.
So then we have career. Career abuse it really manifests differently for adults versus adolescents. So I'm going to focus on adolescents for the context of this training. Their school is their career. Until their working age. So when we're thinking of how does a teenager cause career abuse to the other person, it's putting them down for being studious. It's telling them to skip classes or manipulating them into skipping classes. It's discouraging them from engaging in after-school activities or receiving tutoring or different things like that. And it damages their ability to actively engage in school. Career abuse also is someone's reputation. So if there is an individual who is deliberately trying to damage another individual's reputation in that career environment or that school environment, then that is considered career abuse. And that's something that can happen in intimate partner relationships as well as interpersonal relationships. So Unique put in the chat, I didn't know they had this many types of abuse. Yeah, our society doesn't really recognize the different types of abuse. So we can definitely go over more information in depth if you reach out to me at Now She Speaks. I'm going to briefly touch on technology abuse. And this is really, really prevalent in teenagers right now. And just a few examples is social media monitoring, stalking, and regulations on how someone else is using their social media. This is also stalking someone's location and making decisions based on where they see someone is, and then contacting them or stalking them wherever they are. I'm going to go over exploitation, then I'm going to pass it over to Jay. So exploitation in adolescence looks different than it is in adults. Exploitation in adolescence can be exploiting someone for their money. So we're dating someone just because their parents give them a really big allowance and they're able to spend their money anywhere, and that's the only reason we're with them. Exploitation can also be when one person is involved in illegal activity and they manipulate and push their partner to also engage in illegal activity, and they're exploiting them through the act of getting them to pursue illegal activity as another person or another accomplice in that activity. So I'm going to pass it to Jay for neglect.
Yeah, so neglect really boils down to failing to take care of somebody properly, and a lot of times we think about that in the context of parent to child, that we're neglecting their needs, that the parent or caregiver is solely responsible for a child's needs. But if we're thinking about it in a broader sense, neglect is failing to care properly, failing to meet somebody's needs in a relationship. Any type of relationship, we kind of have dynamics and needs. So neglect would be failing to meet those needs, failing to meet that role that people have entered into kind of an agreement to have. So I'll give it back to you now, Meghann.
So social abuse when it comes to teenagers is going to look like, let's say a boyfriend telling their partner, I don't want you to be friends with this person or that person, and I don't want you to be spending quality time with your family even. I want you to prioritize spending time with me or not spending time with specific individuals. And social abuse is controlling their social interactions, and it can lead to social isolation. So then we have cultural abuse. Cultural abuse is anything where the person is targeting their identity. So cultural abuse can be someone using racial slurs against their partner in verbal abuse. That's also cultural abuse. Jay has an example of how cultural abuse can be prevalent in LGBTQIA relationships, and that's something we also want to take note of. So Jay, if you want to share that example on cultural abuse.
Yeah, so I had wanted to give some perspective, to a unique sort of situation that I had found myself in. When I was pretty young, around like 12 or 13 years old, I already had a concept of who I was. Being trans, and knowing that I was trans, and I, identified as male, and I wanted to transition when I got older. That was a solid part of my identity that I had. That was, being part of the LGBTQ community was a part of, my identity. And in the teen dating violence, the intimate partner violence situation that I had found myself in high school, that outness, that identity of mine, I was kind of forced back into the closet, because the partner that I was with did not approve of that part of my identity, and had kind of actively pushed me to, you're too beautiful, you can't transition, it wouldn't, it would be a waste, whatever. So I had kind of, to fit that mold and to appease, I had actually socially detransitioned, and after exiting that relationship had come back out again. So that affected that cultural piece of me being a part of the LGBTQ community.
So then spiritual abuse is any time religion or spirituality is used as a weapon against someone else. Oftentimes we might be familiar with church hurt, or how a religious community engaged in abusive behaviors towards the children in that community. That's what we might typically think of when we're thinking of a perpetrator of spiritual abuse, but this can also happen within just two individuals engaging with each other. And when it comes to adolescence, this will manifest as one adolescent insulting and degrading the other person's religious or spiritual identity, or it might also be trying to get them to not engage actively, like not celebrating those holidays or not going to cultural and spiritual events. Then we have reproductive. Reproductive abuse can be perpetrated by both males and females. And this is something that is often overlooked on how it can go back and forth. For females, it can be telling the male partner that they are on birth control when they are in fact not on birth control. For males, this can be engaging in sexual activity, but then removing any protective items, and then that can lead to the risk of pregnancy. This can also be once a pregnancy has already started to occur. This can be one partner really pressuring and coercing the other person to get an abortion or to keep the child when the other person doesn't want to. You know, when we think of being trapped in a relationship due to a child in a pregnancy, that's reproductive abuse, you know, because the parties did not mutually agree on having a child. And there's ways that that can be unhealthy and not abusive, and then there's ways on how that can be abusive. And then Jay, I'm going to pass it over to you to finish us up with pet abuse.
So pet abuse, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's the use of threatening a pet or holding the safety or well-being of a pet over on somebody who the abuser is attempting to control as a means of control. So if, for example, abuser says, I'm going to hurt your pet if you do not give me access to your phone because I think you're cheating or something like that. I will hurt your cat. That would be pet abuse.
Great, thank you for that. We can move forward. So when we're working with adolescents who are at risk of or experiencing an abusive relationship, we want to be considerate of what their triggers might be and also considerate that they might not even know their own triggers. So we as the adult, as the peer advocate, need to walk with caution as we might not be aware and they might not be aware of what triggers there are. So before we start talking about any type of abuse dynamic, we want to give a content warning. We want to give them a heads up that, hey, if you're open, I'd like to talk about this. There might be some uncomfortable aspects of this topic. Let me know if you're uncomfortable with it. Also give them reassurance that they can choose to end the conversation if they're triggered, if they're not comfortable. Let them know that, hey, if I say something that makes you uncomfortable, feel free to stop me. We don't have to stick on this conversation. And that's giving the power back to the youth too. So censor yourself on the extent of details that you give. As peers, we want to strategically share our experiences and stories. However, depending on that youth's maturity, depending on their own traumas, depending on their triggers, we might want to censor the details that we provide. And a rule of thumb that I always teach is we share the headlines, not the details. And if it's appropriate and it's going to benefit the youth, then we can share the details of whatever that headline might be. You can still get a strong message across by sharing just the headline of something and not getting into the deep details. And I already covered the maturity of the youth. Maturity of the youth might not be dependent on age. It can be dependent on where they're at in their life. It can be dependent on what they've experienced. It can be dependent on any mental health disabilities or mental health successes, so that's very subjective per the situation. So that's something to be aware of. We can move on to the next slide. So as you are discussing relationship dynamics with the youth you are working on, there's some different things that you want to keep in mind. So consider the preferences, the style of speaking, code switching, tones, how you might speak to someone who is 13 who grew up in the city might be different than how you speak to someone who's 16 who grew up in a rural environment. And we also want to be aware of how does that youth present themselves. We want to kind of mimic that. So also remember that the youth is an expert on their own relationship interactions. We might perceive something as a red flag of abuse, but we might not know the full context of the situation, and it could have just been an unhealthy argument that wasn't necessarily abusive. So even if we have a perception of what might be abuse or not abuse, we still have to remember that the youth is the expert on their life and their experiences, and we don't want to jump to assumptions. It is not our role to label the relationship that a youth is experiencing. It is never our job to say you're in an abusive relationship or even to say you're experiencing physical abuse. We want to provide the information and let the youth label themselves, because if we're labeling the youth, then we're not following the values and the code of ethics of our role as YPAs. And then tailor the discussion to the individual youth style of engagement. So this goes back to our first one, where we want to create an environment that is reminiscent of what's going to make the youth comfortable. Where are they at? What are they comfortable? How do they engage in conversations? Because sometimes youth only need a very brief conversation to have a lot of thought process. And other times you might have to have a very in-depth, thorough conversation for them to process that information. So again, it's going to depend on the youth. We can move forward. So what are some concerns you have when it comes to talking with youth about abuse? Again, you can come off mute or you can put it in the chat.
One concern that came to mind when talking with youth about abuse would be, what if they aren't being completely honest and transparent about their situation? Because maybe they're scared to come forward, or they've never had anyone want to know more about them, and they've never had to open up that much. So that would be one of my concerns, that they aren't being completely honest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a valid concern.
I would say a concern for me would be sometimes when you talk to a youth who may be experiencing intimate partner violence, they may be, upset with their partner at the time and like say they're ready to leave and stuff, but then they may change their mind after. And because you guys had that conversation, they might not want to come back to speak about it again because they decided not to leave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I do want to say that is the importance of what Megan was saying, not labeling a relationship per se and allowing the youth to label it themselves, because you're
Yeah.
taking away that like judgment. You're kind of going into it like, whether you stay or go or whatever you choose, like, I'm just here. I'm just here to support you. Because I think that's true. People get kind of embarrassed of like, you told me it wasn't good. It wasn't good for me to go back, and I did it anyway. I feel like I had a lot of experience with that as well. When I was in high school and I was in the situation I was, where I was like, I didn't want to tell people that I went back, like or whatever, or I would hide things because of that. So just keeping that open, like, I'm just whatever you choose, I'm here for you. Like, I'm just here to listen. And, when they do disclose that, just taking it with as much non-judgment as possible is going to be how you avoid that.
And I actually have one more concern too, is when it gets really serious and at a certain point, like YPAs are mandated reporters. So I guess like teetering that line of like when to know when to escalate that or not.
Z, that's a really, really valid point to bring up, and we're actually going to get a little bit more into that later on in the presentation. So thanks for bringing that up. It's a good thought. Alexandra put in the chat, my concerns would be their support system. They may not have adequate support at home or with their friends. Also, cultural sensitivity, different cultural views of abuse is different. Yes, yes. In my training at Now She Speaks, we actually address how cultures impact the perception of abuse. But Jay, did you want to respond to this concern?
The concern about cultural sensitivity or the concern about the support system? Because I think that the support system we might get a little bit more into when we start talking about the conversation starters and the activities. So we can definitely go over that, and hopefully that will address that concern about the support system. As for cultural sensitivity, reach out to Megan. Megan's got the resources. All All right, so I'm going to get into a few conversation starters or they're really more of conversation redirectors, where we can facilitate those conversations about healthy interpersonal relationships, see what the youth's values are. And you could really, I mean, you could use this for anybody. It doesn't need to be just the youth that we're serving. So it's just a good skill to have in life. But this is, I've framed it to support youth specifically when I think of these conversation starters. So you could go to the next slide and we will talk about school and social life. So what does it mean for a person to like or dislike you? So if a youth is and you want to tailor this as well, the code switching, and how we speak to youth on a personalized basis, like Meghann was mentioning before. We might not say this word for word, but just facilitating that conversation of being liked or being disliked, is hopefully going to allow the youth to really reflect on, like, oh, well, actually, what ways do people show me that they like me? How do I show people that I like them? What does that feel like? What does that mean? And what type of people, I didn't put that on the slide, but I do have a list, that I could always email after the fact. What type of people do you spend time with? So who are the people that you gravitate to in school? Are these people that are healthy, or are these people that are like my family, like friends at an old school? And really allowing the youth to think about what they're looking for when they interact with people. You can go to the next slide that was social friendship. I'm sorry. So what do you look for in a friendship? People hang out, youth, anybody, they hang out with people and they may not consider them a friend. They might consider them an acquaintance or a mutual friend or something. But what are we looking for in a friendship? What makes a good friend? What are your friends usually like?
They're friendly, they listen, they have open arms.
Yeah, so if I'm having a conversation with Unique, that would be sort of, Unique's wheels were already spinning on, like, well, who are the people that I like to be friends with? When I think about friends and I think about the people that I want to spend time with, it's like I want authenticity. I don't want friends that just make small talk, and that's my personal, like, values when it comes to friendships. So what are the youth's values when it comes to friendships? These are the conversations that, we can have so that they can really decide. Maybe they have a friend that they're like, oh, I'm just being friends with them because they're in my social circle and I just decided to make them my friend. Are they really the type of person that you look for, when you look for friends? Maybe they would make a good friend for somebody else, but just, based on your values, are you being true to yourself? So the next slide is going to be about conversation starters about family. So if a youth is bringing up to you maybe a conflict between themselves and their mother, for example, we can talk about what it means for caregivers to show you that they care. Like my mom, I have a restricted license and my mom won't let me drive, but I'm licensed, and then how does mom usually show that she cares? Oh, well, my mom's always worried about me, and my mom's always worried that I'm going to get, into, some trouble. I'm going to get hurt, whatever. So maybe she told you you can't drive because you recently got into a fender bender. Now she's worried about you, like, and that will allow the youth to really think about, how do I want to approach this conversation with mom? And how does that reflect on how other people will care about that youth in the future? How do friends and family members show they care? How do you show you care? Like, when you're in a relationship, maybe it's a toxic relationship, it's an unhealthy relationship, and the youth is finding, I don't treat my partner the way that I treat most of the other people in my life that I care about, because the relationship is starting to decline and I don't want to be in that relationship anymore. So I'm not treating them that same way. So that's like another way to really, get the youth to think about that. And then the final one is maybe a little bit more upfront. If we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about dating and relationships. I really, just this one question is the big question. Because all the other questions prior kind of, when we think of romantic relationships, or, those relationships that we're going to have for the rest of our lives, we think about foundations, the relationships we had when we were younger. But really, just what are some goals? What are some long-term things that we think about when it comes to relationships, family, marriage? And then that might also come up with a reflection of, my boyfriend said that he wanted kids in the future. I don't want kids. I never want kids. Is that conflict ever really going to be resolved? Or might that youth find themselves in a situation where reproductive abuse that we were speaking about before, right, might be a possibility if the relationship is unhealthy or abusive? So this gives the youth really the ability to think, is this person really a long-term person, or am I just enjoying this in the moment? Am I just, like, there are good things and bad things and whatever, and in the moment it's nice, but like, I don't actually really like the way that person is, and I don't want to see them in my future. I don't want to get married to this person. I'm just kind of living in the moment, right? Whatever the case may be, now the youth has really reflected on the values of what they want in a romantic relationship. So those are the conversation starters that I have come up with, or redirections. Are there any other conversation questions, topics, starters, redirections that anybody else can think of that we could share with each other? Thank you, Unique. She says those are great conversation starters. And if you can think of any, place them in the chat and we can always come back to them. That's a good one.
Z,
How
I
does your
love
relationship
that.
make you feel about yourself? That is a good one. I wish I had included that. How does your support system look?
Ooh, and I want to add on to that. How does your support system look? Do you feel your partner embraces your support system? And you can reword that however might be appropriate for that youth, but that's going to help them reflect on social isolation. Is their support system embraced and encouraged, or is that partner kind of discouraging them from engaging with other individuals?
So I think we could get into the next slide. Of course, keep sharing if you want to share in the chat if you have any more that you think of.
So in our role as youth peer advocates, we strategically self-disclose. So in the chat or come off mute, I want to know, how can we share our lived experience with youth safely and with boundaries? And that's the most important part here, is with boundaries. So when we're strategically sharing, when we're self-disclosing details, whether great details or minimal details, we want to consider our motivator. What is the motivator for why we are sharing that detail? What details are relevant to share? What triggers might we need to be aware of, and how do we proceed with caution on triggers? And what is the impact of us disclosing certain details? So, like I said, put it in the chat, come off mute. I'd love to hear a few examples on how we share safely and with boundaries.
You could say that you've also experienced a relationship that made you feel X, Y, and Z. And um, I guess really when talking about lived experience, framing it in this retrospect of like, what are the types of abuse, like, oh, I was isolated socially and this type of thing, so that you're putting a name to what they could be experiencing or what you're seeing.
Yeah, I like that. Describing your situation and then self-identifying. I personally felt that when I experienced this behavior, I felt like it was demonstrating an abusive characteristic, or it was concerning to me because of XYZ reason. So that's a really good approach. Any other thoughts?
I often, with the youth that I've worked with in the past, will say, may I share an example that you might relate to, or something that I've been through that you might relate to. So that almost kind of has a built-in trigger warning, I feel like, because the youth has already started to discuss, these are the things that impact me negatively. And I'm saying I have an experience as well, but it might be too triggering to speak about. So may I share an example of something similar?
That is golden, and that goes back to censorship, as well as giving them the authority and the power to say, I'm not comfortable with something. That's great. Let's move forward. So strategic sharing our lived experience with intention, boundaries, and safety. And this is intention, boundaries, and safety for the youth and for ourselves, because strategic sharing can impact us, not just the youth. So ways to be strategic: identify your purpose. Know your purpose beforehand. This is your intention. Why are you sharing? Choose specifically. Choose the details that are most relevant to share. There are certain settings where we might share a wide range of details of our story because it might be appropriate per that setting. However, sometimes it might only be appropriate to share one or two details that are relevant to the specific conversation or the context of the situation. When you're sharing to connect with the youth. You're not sharing to vent. You're not sharing to say, I went through this and this is how I labeled it, and that's it. There's definitely needs to be that connection to the youth. How are you building that sense of safety and trust and familiarity? Respect for triggers, we already talked about this. And then when you're sharing your story, you really want to focus on the healing, recovery, and healthy coping aspects of how you got through that experience. And that's how we're going to inspire and encourage recovery, healing, as well as help them get through the stages of change where they feel that this might not be a healthy relationship for them and they take action to step out of it. We can move forward.
So here are some information about some activities that you could do for promoting healthy relationships. One of the bits of feedback that I've heard from youth peer advocates, especially in rural areas, is that there's nothing to do. There's not a lot, that I can do with the youth. I can't think of any activities. I have to drive already an hour to see the youth, transporting them different places, whatever. So I did come up with a list that I'm trying to put it in the chat. But so I've split them into 4 different categories. Self-love. So activities that help the youth's positive self-image and self-esteem and highlights their strengths. So just a few examples of that. Affirmations. You could get a little mirror and write affirmations on it with Sharpie or those, markers that you can get at the dollar store where you write on like a car or something, making that sort of affirmation mirror that they can put in front of themselves at the beginning of the day. And then when they're doing their hair, their makeup, whatever, they have to think about it. They have to do those affirmations right there. Doing an unexplored hobby or interest. Give it a try. Like being there with the youth. The youth says, I've always wanted to try crocheting. I just don't have the time. Okay, well, let's do it. It's an unexplored thing. We're doing it for you. It's promoting self-love and self-care and doing it for myself. Even if it doesn't actually, it's not productive. Like it's not creating this big productive, I'm doing schoolwork and I'm making this and I'm doing that for a purpose. No, just don't even do it for purpose. Let's just do something that's fun. Let's just do it to do it. And a vision board or an accomplishment board. There are apps that you can do it with. You could get free magazines and make it with free magazines like that you find at doctor's offices, see if they have old magazines. It's very low cost thing that you could do, and you could do it together. Buy some poster board at Dollar Tree or Dollar General or whatever and just make it. Some social activities. Activities that promote multiple social connections or strengthen existing support networks. So this was kind of going back to, that question of what does a support system look like, creating the support system. I know that was Alexandra's concern that you put in the chat. So a few things I had put together. So there's some low stakes social activities where the youth can make surface level relationships, and then it can expand, it can grow, and they can, see it kind of become a little bit stronger when they get into those unhealthy interpersonal relationships. Who can they lean on, right? So sometimes it's going to be a paid structured activity like laser tag, escape room, paint and sip, whatever, things that you can find that might cost money. If you're in a program like high fidelity wraparound, they usually have good budgets for that. You might not have a budget for that. So then there's things like the park, going to library classes, going to the community center. There's tons of resources. I've found that actually there's a lot of hidden resources upstate. I'm from Long Island. I don't really know, a lot of the things that go out there, but if you do some deep digging, you might find something. I found a few things, and I'm, always feel free to reach out to me if you need some help with finding those local resources. And community events is the next one, the activities that get the youth involved in their community and build trust in the community. Really have, things like community service and volunteer opportunities, or things happening at like town hall or something like that. So Long Island has 1,000,001 beaches, so you can always get a beach cleanup. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure that's the same in the city. You can always find a beach cleanup somewhere in the summer. Finding things at the local animal shelter, different county summer, what do you call it, summer camp programs, being a counselor in training or a camp counselor, getting the youth involved in things that may not be paid, but at least explore interest and include resume building and get them involved in the community, get them meeting people, building trust in different, safe adults in their community. And the final one is mindfulness. So these are activities that help the youth get in touch with themselves and their surroundings. If you're mindful, you're paying more attention to the relationships that you have and you're seeing them a little bit more for what they are because you've started that mindfulness practice. Art and painting, they don't have to be good at it. I'm not good at it, but I'll still sit and I'll do, some little art. Nature walk, taking the time to just be in nature. Half hour walking around at a state park and just being, asking the youth, what do you see? Telling the youth what you see, playing some I Spy game, and just getting them immersed in their surroundings. Mindful eating, drinking, mindful tea, mindful coffee, whatever. Just taking the time to quietly eat and like think about the flavors, think about the temperature, all these different parts of the food or drink. Doing that together. And taking away the kind of like silliness of it, of like, why do I have to sit here and eat really, really slowly? Well, I'm going to do it. So now you don't have to feel so embarrassed if you do it. And meditation. There's so many free meditation apps. I'm coming up with a list, and I'm sure that it will eventually be available soon, of just a ton of free apps on Apple or Android that you could get, and you could participate together with the youth in just those like mindfulness, gratitude, affirmation activities that get you immersed in your current situation and what's going on around you and being present. So we can go to next slide about youth disclosures, next steps. Okay, so the first step, if you could go to the next slide, that is the initial response, how you're handling it when a youth discloses. The immediate reaction. The youth says, I experienced this thing. My boyfriend slapped me last night, just as an example. He slapped me and I didn't know what to do. Okay, so gratitude. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm really grateful that you trusted me enough to talk to me about this. Right off the bat. Validation. It sounds like what you went through is really frustrating. It's really upsetting. I can see that it's, making you really upset, and that makes sense. Rephrasing or paraphrasing, the youth might say, I feel so pissed off at myself for staying this long. And your response might be, I'm hearing you're feeling some frustration and shame about how you stayed in the relationship with them. We were talking about this earlier, right? That shame, that like frustration. Oh my God, like I went back again. I did this again. And just rephrasing it and paraphrasing it and showing that you understand what they're saying. Summarizing, what you've told me so far is now you're bringing back those details so that the youth knows that you've been listening, or can add some things. No, you misunderstood what I said here. I actually meant this. Oh, okay. And then finally clarifying. As an example, the youth might say about their girlfriend, she beat me up. That could mean so many things. So let me clarify. So I'm hearing that your partner is hurting you, actively hurting you. Am I right? Right? Like I'm hearing that, it seems like what your partner is saying, or I'm sorry, it seems what your partner is doing is using their hands. They are physically harming you. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I said. You know what I mean? So you're getting that clarification of exactly what happened so that you're not misunderstanding. Maybe there's a slang that you didn't know that, they're not actually disclosing. Maybe they're just using slang. So now you know exactly what you're looking for, exactly what you're talking about. So then the next part is discussing further disclosure. There's two different sort of disclosure situations that we're going to go over. Sometimes you're a mandated reporter, you have to disclose these things, and we're going to go into that a little bit more in depth. But sometimes you're just encouraging them to disclose further because you're not a mandated reporter in that specific situation. So if this is a situation where you don't have to report it, it's not required of you, you are going to encourage the youth to report the information to a trusted adult. Just encourage them. Just let them know it's safe. Or offer, what can I do to help you feel safe doing it? What ways will you feel more comfortable disclosing if you choose to do so? Establishing the sense of safety and reassuring the youth. I'm going to be with you through this step. You're asking me to be with you while you talk to dad. Dad's your safe person. Dad's the person that you trust. I want to tell my dad what happened, but I'm just afraid he's going to react XYZ. All right. Would you like me to do that with you? Yes. Okay. So I'll be here with you. I will sit with you while we talk to your dad. And what do you need me to do to support you through that process? The other side of it on the next slide, reportable information. So if you receive, oh, did I freeze? I think I froze.
No,
Oh, am I back? I think I froze. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, it's all good.
Oh,
You can keep going.
okay, thank you. So, all right. So the next slide over, reportable information. If you find yourself receiving information that you have to report, explain to the youth what confidentiality is. Explain why the confidentiality has to be broken, and provide the youth with choices about reporting. Oh, I think this is the wrong slide. Are you able to go to the next slide? There we go. Okay, there we go. Thank you. So, yeah, if the abuse is something that you must report, explain to the youth what confidentiality is, why it has to be broken, and provide the youth with choices about reporting. At my previous place of employment, there was a sign that we used to use, and it had like the 3 reasons that we would have to report information. So the youth knew ahead of time with this sign, that's, that those are reasons that I would have to break confidentiality. So it's strongly recommended that you have these conversations about mandated reporting ahead of time. Like I said, the sign, or even just in the first few conversations that you have with this youth, just talk about it right as soon as you connect with that youth and you're matched with that youth. And check with each individual program's policy, because it is going to differ maybe slightly from program to program, agency to agency. So then the next slide, we're going to go quickly over safety planning. So we're going to be providing resources and handouts. There's, a bunch of things like on Love is Respect or other websites that have safety planning worksheets. Things that the youth can write down when they're considering all these different ways that they can exit an unhealthy relationship if it turns abusive, or a relationship that's already abusive. Discussing communication. How are they going to communicate if they absolutely have to get out of a situation? Who are they going to call if they are in immediate danger? Figure that out ahead of time. Safe places and spaces. So if you need to exit immediately, where do you go? The youth needs to have, you know, the information of like, where do I stay? Where do I put myself? Where can I stay for the night? You know, where am I going to be safe, really? And then steps for staying safe in the moment. If there is nothing you can do to get out, what are you going to do in the moment to reduce the amount of harm that you receive from whatever abuse is happening? And hopefully it would not come to that point, of course, but having the plan in place so that the youth knows that they have options. And then the final one is empowerment and action. So you could go to the next slide, and we are going to say asking the youth what they want to do next, right? Like maybe they're like, okay, well, I just want to see how this goes. I just want to maybe they'll change. Maybe we'll have a conversation and the partner will change. That's their choice. And you're there to support them if they change their mind, right? Or you're there with that safety plan of, all right, that we have the safety plan. We talked about the safety plan. Trust in yourself. Make this decision for yourself. And if something happens, you have the plan. I'm here for you, and we'll figure it out from there. How does the youth want to proceed? You know, similarly, what is the next steps? Are you comfortable sharing with me what you'd like to do tomorrow about it? How you want to have this conversation with your boyfriend who, you know, crossed your boundaries? And respecting the youth choice. Again, just like I was saying, I'm here for you. We came up with our safety plan. I feel comfortable, you know, as your youth peer advocate. As long as you feel comfortable, you know, let me know let me know if you need me. So now Megan's gonna go a little bit more in depth into that mandated reporter resources and
So these slides are going to be sent out, but I highly encourage you to just take a picture or put some of these numbers in your phone as I go over this. So we are mandated reporters. There are things that we need to be aware of that are considered reportable, as well as what to do. So first and foremost, before you make a report, you need to discuss it with your supervisor. The company and the department itself might have a specific process on how they make mandated reports. So you want to ask them first. It's also possible that your supervisor might want to make the report as opposed to you yourself. So that's something that you're going to talk with your supervisor. You want to know what is your agency's protocol before a situation ever occurs. So that way you're not in a situation where you're like, oh, this is dangerous, this is reportable, what do I do next? You want to already know what to do next. So after this training, when you're back at work in your next shift, I highly encourage you, ask your supervisor, what is the mandated reporting procedure? So then we have these numbers. A lot of them are really important, especially when we're working with youth. We still want to be able to provide them as well as utilize them ourselves. So the ones that we can provide to youth are all of the ones underneath the New York State mandated reporter. That first number is just for us. Everything else, the youth themselves can make their own report, and that's really valuable in empowering them. And even if they themselves don't feel like they're in a situation that needs to be reported, giving them those numbers is giving them a resource, and it's continuing to give the power back to them. So really take that under consideration. We can move forward. Okay, so technology safety planning. Technology abuse is like super common amongst adolescent abusive relationships. So there's a variety of different things that we can do. In the link in the QR code there is safety planning sheets for technology, for school, for social groups. There's a variety of resources. So I highly recommend checking that out, downloading some of those resources. And then when you're safety planning with a youth, you have something already developed in there. So there's a variety of apps that can be used for spying. And these are apps that, youth might not even be aware of, or they might have used and then not know that it can be used to spy, such as TeamViewer. That can be used if someone needs help doing things on their phone and it's at a distance, or you need a second phone. TeamViewer can later be used to stalk someone's phone activities. So we want to turn off location access for all apps. Snapchat is the most popular, where if you allow Snapchat to access your location, it has your location at all times. Snapchat has been proven to be used as a stalking app by adolescents because it pinpoints their location so specifically. You can zoom in on the map and see the exact house that they're at. So block all individuals on social media. That's appropriate. Avoid making comments or statements regarding the relationship online. This is going to fuel any potential drama. So then we want to change passwords of all accounts. Changing passwords on all accounts is not just adding a number or adding a symbol. It is completely changing the password to something that the other person might not assume. So if your password is, let's say, your favorite animal and the year you were born, that other person might think that you're going to create another password with your favorite animal and just do a different number combination. So it has to be completely different. If you did an animal, you want to go to a flower and totally change it up, or a piece of food, or however that person's going to be able to remember a completely unique password. Log out of all devices. This is something that we forget. Just because you changed your password does not mean that your account can't be still accessed. You have to make sure that you have gone into the system settings and made sure that you have logged out of all devices. And you have to change the password with that, because otherwise, if you don't do one or the other, then it has no effect. You have to do both. Two-factor authentication, that's something that's becoming more popular. Securing devices with PINs, passwords, biometric locks, all really valuable to do. Monitor your phone for unusual activity, monitoring the social media, monitoring any messages or chats, or even like, has your gallery pictures been moved around? Is something missing? That's something to take under consideration too. And then lastly, remove relationship imposed parental controls in settings and apps. So parental controls are really valuable, and they are important for guardians and parents to use on their adolescents' devices, even as teenagers. But these parental controls can be misused by a partner, and then that partner can put controls on that device, and then they themselves have a specific passcode to alter those parental controls. So that's something to, take under consideration. We can move forward.
So I do just want to mention I'm about to drop the teen safety plan in the chat. That's from loveisrespect.org. All right. So share out. If anybody has anything they'd like to share, of course, in the chat, come off mute, whatever you'd like. What did you learn today that will be most helpful to you, either personally or professionally? Maybe this is not something that you have run into with your youth, but somebody, a loved one is somebody that, has experienced this, or you are concerned about a loved one, wherever the case may be.
I would just have to go back to the fact that I literally am today years old when I learned that there are many different forms of abuse, and it's not just physical, mental, and emotional abuse. Because those were literally the three that I have stuck with for many years, even through experience with like friends and family members who have been through tons of abuse. I wasn't even aware that there were more than 3, 4. And something that stuck out to me was like the reproductive abuse. I through lived experience with one of my close friends, or she's like a sister to me now. She has been going now that I know it's part of a type of abuse, I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, and you definitely don't feel like you're behind or out of place. The types of abuse, the variety of types, is not something our culture or society teaches or provides awareness to. So being today years old and learning that, that's not anything negative on you. And I'm happy that by gaining this knowledge, you now are having insight into what a peer or someone you support might be experiencing. And we can always chat individually about how different types of abuse are manifesting in adults, or as well as how it's manifesting in adolescents. I did a deep dive into the types of abuse that adolescents can perpetrate in the junior youth peer advocate training. So we can always connect on that. You can review that material with Jay. So thank you for sharing that. What other takeaways do we have?
Thank you, Meghann, and thank you, Jay.
I think in the interest of time, it might be good to just move forward at this point with the next slide for the Q&A. Just real quick before we completely wrap up and show, what upcoming events are coming up. There will be QR codes if you want to take out your phones now for that. Are there any last minute final questions before we put up those upcoming events?
Not at the moment.
Okay. I guess we can go to the next slide. All right. Thank you so much, y'all, for coming out, for watching, for seeing us. So I think, Meghann, you could talk a little bit about the youth peer meetings.
Yeah, so we have our youth peer meetings once a month. I briefly touched on that in the beginning. Highly recommend you come join. Conversations and topics are really led by the attendees. So this is a really good opportunity to get like that one-on-one mentorship and guidance, as well as getting guidance from your peers who have different experiences and skills and backgrounds. So highly recommend. We can go to the next slide.
So these are the events that I assist with facilitating or facilitate. So there's a supervisor lived experience cafe for people who supervise youth peer advocates. If you're, if you are a youth peer advocate and your supervisor would like, some direction and affinity space with other youth peer advocate supervisors, it's going to be bi-monthly, second Friday of every other month, sorry, from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. You could scan the QR code, follow the link to see, to register for that event or to have them register for that event, and then technical assistance calls, just like this one. If you want to register for the upcoming one in November, it's going to be the third Thursday of next month. You can scan the QR code and register for that. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining, for
Jay.
listening. If you have to contact us, if you wanted to, contact Meghann more about the things that she does with Youth Power and the Now She Speaks, email address is there. I'm going to put my email address in the chat just in case, if you have any questions about anything that we've gone over today. And we just hit the 2:00, so we did pretty good.
Yeah, I highly recommend reaching out to Jay for any like one-on-one interactions if you want guidance on a specific situation that a youth is experiencing. He can give you that, TA there. But if you want to explore more into the types of abuse, I am always open to talking about that and raising awareness. So this was good. Thank you for attending this and active engagement. We always really appreciate that active engagement.
Thank you, Meghann. Thank you, Jay.